Good evening, everyone on Zoom. My name is Dr. Stella Silverman. I live in Alberta, Canada. By trade, I am a surgical pathologist diagnosing predominantly breast cancers. I specialize in breast pathology. By my call and by my mission, I teach health. And that is why we're here today. We are extremely honored today to host and being taught and lectured by incredible Dr. Bob Miller. He is an absolute genius. He is a cellular magician, maverick, I would say. I was searching for the word maverick because, guys, I don't understand. I don't know who understands the cell intricacies as better than Bob Miller. So he is the founder and of the institute, Nutrigenetic Research Institute. Obviously, he runs it, and it's an incredible what he does. You're going to hear today, especially in light of what we are living in, how he ties it up in the cells, in the mitochondria, in a whole array of biochemical pushers and activators. So without further ado, Dr. Miller, Bob, I'm just blessed. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Silverman. My pleasure to be here. First, I want to mention that all of this information is for educational and informational purposes only. We're not telling you how to diagnose any disease or treat any disease. So we just want to be very clear on that this is educational only. Now, I know for many of you, you may be like, IL-6. What is IL-6? That stands for interleukin 6. And we're going to get into that. And just first, a little bit about me. I'm just a traditional naturopath, not a medical doctor. As Dr. Silverman said, I'm the founder and president of the Nutrigenetic Research Institute. And if anyone on here is a medical professional or holistic health professional, we've created functional genomic analysis software that helps do some of this analysis. Now, I had an artist draw this up, and we call it the 3D chess game played underwater. And the reason we do that is because this is complex. You know, a lot of our models are based upon, sometimes what we call the pill for the ill. What diagnosis do we have? What do we give for it? Or even as we look at genomics, many times we're looking for, what is the SNP related to fill in the blank disease? And I believe what we're going to find over time, that's very limited in its ability to give us the kind of information that we're going to need, because I think we're very, very complex. And when we look for simple answers, we're just not going to find them. So our subject tonight is going to be something called interleukins. Now, some of you never even heard of those. But what they are, they're a class of chemical mediators involving signaling between cells, particularly your white blood cells. Inter meaning between, leuc reference to the leukocytes. Now, interleukins are a type of cytokine. You'll see over to the side here the cytokines. The term cytokine is derived from a combination of two Greek words, cyto meaning cells, and kinos meaning movement. That's all that it does. They're cell signaling molecules that aid cell-to-cell communication in immune responses. That's a key point. And stimulate movement of the cells towards sites of inflammation, infection, and trauma. So what we're saying here is that these cytokines, when we have a pathogen coming into us, it's part of our body's ability to protect itself. It's what comes to the rescue and starts trying to kill that pathogen. And then if we cut ourselves or injure ourselves, those cytokines come there and they help with the infection and the trauma. The problem becomes when they become too aggressive and they're stimulated too much. And one of the things, Dr. Silverman, I marvel at is that there seems to be a bell curve for just about everything. We can have too little or too much of just about anything. Without oxygen, we're dead within 3 to 4 minutes. Breathe pure oxygen, we're dead in 3 or 4 days. Without water, we're dead in 6 to 8 days. Drink 3-4 gallons a day, we wash out our electrolytes and our heart stops. So there's this sweet spot between not too much and not too little. So bottom line here, what I want to get across in just these first few minutes is that this is in the body for a purpose and serves a good purpose unless it gets out of control. And I think what we're going to find is that, as Dr. Silverman said, we've done many things in our environment that we're going to look back someday, maybe even look back now and say, oops, what were we thinking? What did we do here? So what happens here is there's significant evidence showing that certain cytokines are involved in not only the initiation, but the persistence of pathological pain by directly activating sensory neurons. And certain inflammatory cytokines are also involved in nerve injury, inflammation-induced central sensitization, and in peripheral inflammatory responses. So there's two types of signaling pathways. There's the classical, and that's when it occurs in the white blood cells, the liver, and this creates that acute phase inflammatory response and the potential anti-inflammatory actions. Then the second one is the trans-signaling, where the IL-6 is binding to the interleukin 6 to the IL-6 leads to the cellular membrane, which causes increased bioavailability and decreased half-life of IL-6. And this promotes a pro-inflammatory activity. And that's where we get in trouble when it's going too fast. Now, I'm sure many of you have heard of C-reactive protein. It's a major mediator of acute phase inflammation and is used to measure the underlying levels of inflammation. And again, plays a role, but when it's too high, we have a problem. So as we said, there's good things that it does. Okay, it protects against pathogens. It's there for acute inflammation. And total elimination has shown to increase susceptibility to various infections. Now, here's a study, and again, mostly what we're going to have tonight is going to be slides that are peer-reviewed studies. These are on PubMed, where some scientists did an experiment, they published a paper, and their peers approved it. So we try to make sure that everything we say is based upon peer-reviewed studies. So here's what they did. They induced arteriosclerosis to evaluate the impact of IL-6 and arteriosclerosis. And what they found is, bottom line is, that in some instances, the IL-6 was actually helpful. So here's one where they found the beneficial effects mediated by exercise may induce IL-6 production. And then it's released in the contracting muscles. And that may help the gastric functions in response to exercise. So we just have a very few slides here that are going to tell you about how IL-6 is going to be beneficial, because we just want to make sure we don't just emphasize the bad. Now, here's one study that said the authors found IL-6 induced muscle inflammation, or blocked the muscle inflammation. Thus, IL-6 may have a beneficial role with some conditions. And if anyone's interested, perhaps we'll put a link in the somewhere that you can grab these slides, because somebody may be really interested and want to read all of these studies. We're just hitting the key points because we have so much inflammation. So here it is, says IL-6 appears to have a specifically important role in wound repair and helps that wound heal. Now, as you can see, it's only a few minutes into the to this recording, and we've talked about the good things. We're now going to talk about what happens when IL-6 gets carried away. Now, this is an interesting study that they looked at the elderly, and there's something called inflammaging, where there's low-grade inflammation. And that's a risk factor for the development of all kinds of age-related diseases. And they studied a large amount of people. And here's the key point. When comparing successfully aging individuals to those with aging-related diseases, disability, there was lower IL-6 levels in the successfully aging group. They found that longer survival was associated with lower concentrations of IL-6 and CRP. So what was the conclusion? Both IL-6 and CRP levels were good predictors of physical and cognitive performance and the risk of mortality in both the entirely elderly population and in successful aging individuals. So what's this saying? They're saying that when interleukin 6 and C-reactive protein is too high, that is going to create faster aging, more deterioration, and less ability to age successfully, something all of us want to do, age successfully. Now, look at this study. IL-6 was consistently related to all-cause mortality, independent of the level of adjustment, and showing a dose-responsive relationship between IL-6 and risk of death. So what they're saying, it's a powerful predictor of all-cause mortality in male elderly men in community dwellings. Now, this is interesting. High blood pressure is a huge problem. So here they're saying that this data suggests IL-6 may be actively involved in hypoxia-induced lung inflammation and pulmonary vascular remodeling in mice. In other words, we're talking about the pulmonary hypertension and the lung inflammation. Now, when we get to the cardiovascular system, IL-6 contributes to the endothelial dysfunction. It's produced as a response to angiotensin II, and we're going to talk about what that is in a little while when we show some of the charts. IL-6 is associated with hypertension and a higher incidence of all-cause mortality. Now, there's a very nasty free radical called superoxide, and that's created inside the cell when the cell is making energy. An electron will fly off, combine with oxygen to make superoxide, and that combines with something called nitric oxide, which is needed for good blood flow and many other things, and it creates something called peroxynitrite, thus further lowering the nitric oxide bioavailability. I used to call peroxynitrite the gorilla in the room because it is such an oxidizing agent. It also suppresses the immune system, and it's behind so many conditions that are affecting us today. This I found absolutely fascinating, Dr. Svetman. IL-6 is increased in the cerebellum of the autistic brain and alters neurocell adhesion. You know, clearly we all know that autism used to be relatively rare, 1 out of 1,000. Now we're getting numbers somewhere around 1 out of 45, and it looks as though that trend is not going to decrease, but may increase. Bottom line of this study, increased IL-6 expression may be partially responsible for some of the issues with autism. What do you think of that, Dr. Svetman? That's pretty amazing, isn't it?
That is incredible, especially considering, again, you know, I'm a mitochondriac and stuff, how many mitochondria are in the cerebellar neurons.
Yes, absolutely good point. Absolutely good point. Now, look at this. Evidence for emotion biology relationships. Clinically anxious participants exhibited significantly lower levels of the morning cortisol. And by the way, cortisol is what's made by the adrenals. It inhibits histamine, and cortisol also gets turned into cortisone, which is very anti-inflammatory. That's why sometimes physicians will give prednisone or corticosteroids to deal with inflammation. So there was lower cortisol and significantly higher levels of IL-6, independent of age, sex, and depressive symptoms. So there's even a mind-body relationship to the IL-6. Found this one absolutely fascinating. Animal studies and clinical studies have demonstrated that IL-6 may have a special role in depressive disorder. And clearly, I mean, we are seeing depression going through the roof. As I talk to psychologists and psychiatrists, they tell me that the amount of people that are now depressed. I just spoke to a psychologist yesterday, and she mentioned that in the past, they used to actually do therapy to try to help the people get through it. She said we're now just a point of coping, just how to deal with it, because the depression is becoming so severe. This one really surprised me. Cytokines are even involved in suicidal behavior. Elevated IL-6 was the most robust cytokine finding associated with suicidal ideation and both non-fatal suicide attempts and suicides. And there's nothing more sad, particularly, you know, when a youngster decides to take their life. And if we're seeing this increase in IL-6, you know, there's multiple factors, but this appears to be one of the factors.
Well, let me interrupt you for a second, please, if I can.
Sure, of course.
You just mentioned depression, suicidal, ideation of suicides, and the relations of a lower cortisol and, you know, especially in the morning. What does that mean also? It means to me, again, the IL-6. Now, if we're talking depression, IL-6, then we will connect it eventually to the microgut. We are going to connect it eventually through the vagus into the, into the brain, let's say theanine, serotonin, you name it. And then we're talking lower cortisol. Where are we leaning now? We're leaning now hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis. Lower cortisol in the morning, we're talking about disturbed circadian rhythm. Disturbed circadian rhythm with the sleep, some disturbances and stuff. It's just, again, last lecture you said it's mind-boggling. It is mind-boggling.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as we continue here, we're just going to continue to be amazed at what this does. One of the other sad things that happens is anorexia, when girls think that, despite the fact that they're so thin, they're not thin enough. And there's a tendency toward increased IL-6 production. Interesting, I didn't know this, suppresses food intake in animals in individuals who severely restrict food intake. So they're saying that there might be a potential role for these cytokines in anorexia nervosa. And any family members who has children who do this, it's just so difficult for them to see their child literally starving themselves, but yet convinced that they're fat. Just mind-boggling. Now, one of the things that concerns the elderly group is Alzheimer's disease. And what did we find? Plasma IL-6 were identified as potential biomarkers of Alzheimer's disease at the early stage. And of course, it makes sense. Your brain is 80% fat, and all of this inflammation is going to oxidize the brain. And again, we've seen that going up. And that's one of the scariest things. When I work with my clients, they're at peace with death, but not at having to think they're going to spend their last lives not knowing who they are, thinking their spouse is their parent or their children as their sisters. It is just such a horrible way to end life. And there's multiple things. I'm not saying IL-6 is the only piece of this, but it appears to be a piece of Alzheimer's disease. And of course, what's scary for a lot of women is breast cancer. Several studies are demonstrating the immunopathogenic function of IL-6 and its signaling in tumor growth and therapeutic resistance of breast cancer. So in other words, it's helpful. But therefore, it seems that targeting IL-6 receptor in combination with other potent anti-cancer therapies may be a potent therapeutic approach for breast cancer therapy. So here we have colorectal cancer, again, on the rise. They've linked the cytokine Interleukin-6 to the sporadic and inflammation-associated colorectal cancer. Increased IL-6 expressions has been related to advanced stage of the disease and decreased survival in these colorectal cancer development. Again, such a horrible disease. Inflammatory bowel disease. And of course, from what I'm understanding, inflammatory bowel disease is skyrocketing among children. And again, very, very sad. And again, bottom line there, recent studies have also suggested a potential role of IL-6 in colon cancer and therefore a novel therapeutic strategy for targeting this disease, inflammatory bowel disease and colon cancer. So up top here, it says IL-6 plays a critical role in the uncontrolled intestinal inflammatory process, which is the main characteristics of inflammatory bowel disease. And of course, it really ruins the lives of people when, all they have to think about is where's the nearest restroom and can I go somewhere because I might have to be running to the restroom. It's a very debilitating condition. Here we are. It says a villain in the drama of pancreatic cancer development. Conclusion, IL-6 emergence is a key player in pancreatic cancer development and progression. Here we're back to inflammatory proliferative diseases. Increased IL-6 levels are also observed in several diseases, including rheumatoid arthritis, systemic onset juvenile chronic arthritis, osteoporosis, and psoriasis. Absolutely incredible. I mean, as we did this research, we were stunned at all these findings. So one of their conclusions, IL-6 plays a critical role in autoimmune diseases. Insulin resistance, again, diabetes. When I was a child, we used to call it adult onset diabetes. Now, young people are getting diabetes. Okay. And they're saying the prevention of inflammatory disorders by blocking IL-6 and IL-6 signaling may be an effective strategy for the treatment of insulin resistance. And again, the toll that that's going to be taking, when we got insulin resistance in the mid to late 40s, that wasn't good. But when it starts when you're 10 years old and you have those many more years, just think of the toll that that's going to take and the burden that that's going to be putting on the medical system.
Again, let me interrupt you for a second if I can. What you're just, going through are some of the major conditions or adverse factors to be susceptible to COVID-19 virus. Like diabetes is one of the adverse, frailty and older age, and on and on and on. It just boggles my mind.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm going to be showing you later how this all ties into to interleukin 6, the high blood sugar. We have some charts that are just going to be quite astonishing. All right, let's move on now. Non-thyroid illness. The data revealed a statistical relationship between elevated serum IL-6 concentrations and the circulating thyroid hormones. So this appears to be affecting the thyroid as well. Now, one of the things that has become quite an area of study is mast cells. And, I'll admit when I started studying naturopathy, we didn't even talk about mast cells. Now, when I train doctors, I'll say to them, what percentage of your patients do you think have mast cell activation syndrome? And, they're saying like 60, 70%. We're seeing these mast cells just getting carried away. I'm sure you're seeing that quite as well, aren't you? Yes. So IL-6 blockade might ameliorate mast cell-related symptoms and the pathology in mast cell-related diseases. Now, this slide blew me away. I was stunned by this because in my health consulting, we see a lot of people with mast cells activating too much, and that's where you'll get dermographism or you'll get high histamine because your immune system is actually running too fast. That's what we're talking about, the mast cells going excessively. So again, I was blown away. IL-6 promotes an increase in the mast cell number and reactivity. Stunning. Hot flashes are associated with interleukin 6. I think I was just talking to someone one day and they were talking about hot flashes and I thought, wonder if there's any information on that, and went into PubMed and there it was. So vitiligo, again, these aren't life-altering or life-threatening, but for the person with vitiligo, it's a very traumatic thing to occur. And here we see an increase in the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines, such as IL-6 and IL-2 in vitiligo patients. Thus, we speculate that cytokine production may be involved in vitiligo. Now, one of the things that's scaring everyone right now is COVID. Now, we want to be very clear. We're not saying that we have a cure for COVID. What we're talking about here is that, some people get COVID, they don't even know they had it. Others have mild symptoms, and other people are on ventilators and dying from this disease. So it's that cytokine storm. And look at this study, peer-reviewed, not the Bob Miller opinion. During a meta-analysis and systematic review, elevated IL-6 were found to be significantly associated with adverse clinical outcomes. There was a 2.9-fold increase in IL-6 concentrations in the complicated COVID-19 patients. And what we're talking about here is that cytokine storm. So what happens is the immune system overreacts and starts attacking the lungs. And I don't have the study here. I didn't get a chance to put it in. But there's some studies that showing that the higher someone's their interleukin 6 is when they get COVID, the more potential there is for a negative outcome versus those that have a good outcome. So this is one of the areas that's being studied right now, the NOx enzyme, interleukin 6, and something called bradykinin in COVID-19. And here it says, evidence shows that pro-inflammatory cytokines play a pivotal role in the lung damage in the coronavirus disease 2019. caused by the severe acute respiratory syndrome, SARS-CoV-2. A lot of patients affected by COVID-19 develop a damaging immune reaction sustained by cytokines. Interleukin-6 is one of the main mediators of inflammatory immune response initiated by infection or injury, and increased levels are found in more than half of the patients with COVID-19. Their bottom line, levels of IL-6 seem to be associated with inflammatory response, respiratory failure, needing for mechanical ventilation, and or intubation, and mortality in the COVID-19 patients. Again, published just June of 2020. And if anybody wants to look it up, just type in interleukin-6. As in patients with COVID-19, here's the link to, again, PubMed. We don't put anything on that's not a peer-reviewed study. We're not going to have time to go into this chart, but it just shows all the things that IL-6 does. One of the things that I find interesting is it increases something called hepcidin, which will, as it goes up, lower your iron. But it has effect on the collagen, the VEGF, antibody production. It increases your CRP, decreases your albumin. Those are all the effects of interleukin-6. Now, what we're going to look at, what are some of the things that can cause this? So, as Dr. Silverman just said, when people have higher levels of blood sugar or diabetes, they're more potentially going to have that cytokine storm. Here's the study, hyperglycemia, which of course is high blood sugar, acutely increases circulating cytokine concentrations by an oxidative mechanism, and this effect is more pronounced in subjects with impaired glucose tolerance. And I'm going to show you a chart later that shows you that high blood sugar actually stimulates what's called the RAAS system, and then interleukin-6, and something called aldosterone. Obesity. So adipose tissues is one of the main sources of inflammatory mediators. And of course, we all know that obesity is just going through the roof. I've seen a couple of pictures, I think people have put them on Facebook and things, where they just took a crowd picture from the 1960s, and they said, just look at that crowd picture. Do you see anyone's obese? And when you look, you didn't. Looking at pictures today, I don't have the statistics, but obesity is going through the roof. And what do we get from that? Interleukin-6.
Let me interrupt you for one second again. Obesity. I'm sure, as I know that you will, you tie up interleukin-6 with toxicity. But surprisingly enough, where do the toxins live? Where do they reside? They reside in adipose tissue. It all makes sense.
Yes, it does. It just so it just ties in all the things that people have been involved in, natural health with, all the things they've been talking about. Watch your blood sugar, watch your weight, and now we're seeing the negative effects of that. Now, I'm going to show you a chart later that talks about NOx, NADPH oxidase, because as you know, Dr. Silverman, one of my favorite subjects, and that is that the NOx enzyme, I believe, is being upregulated and doing what I call the NADPH steal. And I'll get into that just a little bit at the end. But interleukin-6 induces expression of this enzyme, which then creates the mast cells, which then creates the histamine. It creates more cytokines. And then I'm going to show later how it comes back to just feed upon itself. Here we are in angiotensin 2, which I'll show a chart on later, was found to induce IL-6 and then further the NADPH oxidase. Oxalates, and I'm sure that some people know what these are, but others don't. Just a quick explanation. In some of your healthiest foods, like spinach, kale, beets, that we think of as eating healthy, they contain something called oxalates, and they're like little razor blades. And if your gut is doing okay, those oxalates will just pass through very easily. But if we get leaky gut or other conditions, these oxalates will leak into the body, and eating healthy can be one of the worst things you've ever done. And when I say healthy, I mean spinach, kale, beets, high oxalate foods. And interestingly, This is associated many times with fibromyalgia and vulvodynia, where you just touch the person and they hurt because those little razor blades are inside them. And this study showed that oxalates upregulates the expression and secretion of IL-6 in renal cells. So, and of course, that's your, your potential for your kidney stones. And in our clinic, we often do the Great Plains Oat test, where there are markers for oxalates, and I'm stunned how many people have high oxalates. So, who would have thought that the healthy foods that you could be eating? I mean, how ironic is that, Dr. Silverman, that going off junk food and eating spinach, kale, and beets could actually...
It is very ironic, but the notion again, here comes leaky gut. Here comes the intestinal permeability syndrome. Again, everything is interconnected. Don't get us wrong that you should not be eating spinach, but you should not be eating tons of spinach or putting tons of spinach in your smoothies, because a lot of people do. Spinach is the easiest green to find these days.
Yes, and if your gut is okay, that spinach is just fine. I don't want anybody wrong that I'm against spinach, kale, and beets. But if you already have inflammation of the gut and you have that leaky gut, then you put those high oxalate foods in. It can create quite the hassle. So oxalates can stimulate that interleukin-6 production. Now, homocysteine, many people don't know what homocysteine is, but what happens when there's a process inside the body called methylation, and it's where we take homocysteine and turn it back into something called SAMe, and that SAMe does a lot of processes throughout the body. There's a lot of things that can go wrong genetically, epigenetically, that will cause that homocysteine to go high. And here it says, this study is in favor of an association between homocysteine and IL-6 production. There's an interesting book out there. It's been around for a long time, and it's written for the layperson. It's called The H Factor. It's an easy read. I would encourage people to get it. And what it talks about is how high homocysteine, literally just like IL-6, is the cause for many diseases. Now, keep in mind, again, back to the balance, homocysteine is what the body uses to make glutathione, the master antioxidant. So if we don't have homocysteine, we have a problem. But the higher the homocysteine, the sooner we die from all causes. So what's one of the things you can do here? The next time you see your physician, say, you know what, let's just take a look at my homocysteine, see how that's doing. And the ranges that are put out there, I believe, are too high. I like to see homocysteine in the 6 to 7 range. Dr. Silverman, do you have any thoughts of where you like to see the homocysteine?
I was just listening to Dr. Pam Smith on A4M fellowship. So she likes it at the same range as you said. Over 10 is a big flag. And we all know high homocysteine is linked to cardiovascular disease. With that, we know.
Absolutely. Now, to what degree, IL-6 plays? Is that the major player? Is it a minor player? I don't think anybody knows. But clearly, the higher the homocysteine will damage the cardiovascular system. So here they're saying elevated IL-6, homocysteine, and low folic acid was found in patients in acute heart disease. And of course, we need the folic acid or the methylfolate to take that homocysteine, turn it back into methionine, and then eventually to SAMe. Now, dopamine, fascinating. Dopamine increases interleukin-6 release and inhibits tumor necrosis factor. So isn't this interesting? Dopamine through D2 receptors regulates the release of IL-6 and tumor necrosis factor from the adrenal glands. And again, that's one of the reasons why I like the one of the Great Plains tests, because they'll give you ideas of the VMA and HVA that'll tell you if you have elevated dopamine. And how do you know if you have elevated dopamine? Well, one of them is, if you just really get ticked off quickly, if the least little thing agitates you. Now, some people learn how to not blow their stack, but they really have to work at it. And that high dopamine, now we realize, will increase that interleukin-6. And there are genetic factors that are involved with this. There's a gene called DBH, dopamine beta hydroxase, that converts the dopamine to norepinephrine. Interestingly, Clostridia will inhibit the DBH gene. So if we have Clostridia, that will inhibit DBH, that'll put up your dopamine, and then that will increase your interleukin-6. So back to the gut again. Isn't that astonishing?
That's absolutely unbelievably crazy. Disbalanced microgut is going to elevate the levels of Clostridia, as you said. That is not good. That can bust your IL-6. However, let's look into dopamine. When is dopamine increased? When we're stressed. And who is not stressed? Hello.
Yes, everyone's very, very stressed right now. All right. So in mice, IL-6 administration was found to produce or induce profound elevations in serotonin and dopamine. And of course, if we don't have serotonin, we're depressed. But if serotonin goes too high, you can have that serotonin storm, which can be just as bad. Again, I go back to balance. Okay. Now, I want to talk a little bit about mTOR, mammalian target of rapamycin. That is how we make new cells. So when the sperm and the egg go together, mTOR is what takes that egg and replicates it and turns that sperm and egg into the baby and the baby into the adult. As adults, mTOR is what causes us to make new cells. However, there's a process called autophagy, the cleaning of the cells. And one of the things that's happening is that many environmental factors is upregulating mTOR, downregulating autophagy, and we can't clean out the debris. And that's why we get age spots, sunspots, liver spots on our skin. When the dead cell that is being recycled is not being recycled, and then it becomes oxidized and senescent, and then actually becomes inflammatory. So when people get those age spots at an earlier age, that's an indication potentially that their autophagy is not working. Now, why is that important? Back to COVID, there's literature out there that COVID uses mammalian target of rapamycin for replication, and autophagy helps take it out. But look at this. mTOR actually is activated by interleukin-6. So interleukin-6 stimulates that mTOR that many people are trying to obtain by, they want to obtain good autophagy by intermittent fasting and ketogenic diet. So if you've got a lot of IL-6, you may not be able to find that autophagy that you're looking for. Now, this blew me away. Again, autophagy is the cleaning of the cells. IL-6 inhibits autophagy. Oh my goodness. So here's IL-6, and it comes down, and it will inhibit this guy that actually stimulates autophagy. So you're trying your best to do intermittent fasting or ketogenic diet, and if you've got too much IL-6, you're not going to be as successful. That really surprised me, Dr. Silverman, that it actually enhances the mTOR and inhibits the autophagy. And then that mTOR it's a copy machine, as I often call it. It copies healthy cells, cancer cells, or COVID. It doesn't care. It'll just replicate whoever it gets. So that's why so many people are having success with intermittent fasting or just ketogenic diet, because it slows down the mTOR. Are you, Dr. Silverman, are you an encourager of intermittent fasting or a ketogenic diet?
I'm a very big encourager of both. I personally entirely committed to intermittent fasting. At least in my mind, I do 14 hours. That's a given. And I am proponent of ketogenic diet with sort of my limitations. I do more of the keto style diet as opposed to per se 80-10-10 straight ketogenic diet. And then people completely do the opposite way. They go Atkins way diet, which I don't do. So to me, it's more health related, absolutely. Ketogenic style diet, 100%. And mTOR for me as a breast pathologist is a bad actor because it replicates the cells. So the concept of autophagy and the way to upregulate autophagy is extremely, extremely important. Because
Absolutely.
the more, yeah, because the main player, the main regulator of the cell is a mitochondria. That is why, to me, autophagy and mitophagy is a must deal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, histamine. Um, I'm very fascinated by histamine. I mean, we've been talking about histamine for the last 20 years. And we tend to think of it as, well, you know, the allergies and the runny nose and those sort of things. But this one blew me away. Histamine promotes the release of interleukin-6. So what we do is we get then a feedback loop. And I'm going to show you that loop in just a little bit, because the interleukin-6 stimulates the mast cells to release histamine. And then the histamine stimulates the interleukin-6. And we're on a merry-go-round, Dr. Silverman, that just feeds upon itself. So, and we're going to show that chart in just a little bit. So in our health consulting here in our office at Trio Life, I've been putting so much more emphasis on looking at why histamine is being created, the pathways to degrade it. There's an enzyme called DAO, diamine oxidase, that degrades it. We need cortisol from the adrenals to degrade it. We need the enzyme histamine and methyltransferase. And even there's one pathway that uses glucuronidation. And I believe there's so many environmental factors that's jacking up the histamine. And if we have any impediments to clearing it, we're in trouble. And histamine, of course, is a neurotransmitter. And, you know, I often say, turn on the news for 10 minutes and it's like, what happened to the world? Everyone's coming unglued. Multiple factors. But higher levels of histamine could be a potentially contributing factor. Now, we're going to show a chart a little bit later on bradykinin. Some people call it bradykinin. And that seems to be stimulated by COVID. We'll show some charts for that. But interestingly, bradykinin induces interleukin-6 production. So again, just another feedback loop that causes this inflammatory cascade, the neuroinflammation, the autoimmune diseases. Now, this is interesting. Estradiol decreased interleukin-6 in a dose-dependent manner. So, as we know, too high of an estrogen can be a problem, but we do need estrogens for the bones, and we think that this might be, you know, why it's helpful to have some of the estradiol. But look at this. Estriol had an elevation in the interleukin-6 following what's called an LPS, lipopolysaccharide challenge, that we'll talk about in a little bit. But LPSs are, you know, negative on a bacteria. So these LPSs that are now being found even things like Lyme disease can be elevated because of higher levels of estriol. So working with your physician, ladies, to make sure that those hormones are balanced is very, very important. I've recently seen some women that someone thought that it might be to their benefit to increase the estradiol, and as they did, they got worse. Now, that's not for everyone. I'm just saying for this individual, that was a problem. So who would have thought that balancing these two estrogens would have an effect on your inflammation? Now, what's interesting, we need exercise. And again, I go back to balance in virtually everything. So regular physical activity improves cardiovascular risk factors, including the low-grade inflammation. However, we can do too much of anything. Acute vigorous exercise, such as marathon running, or someone who becomes addicted to exercise and just does it 6 hours a day, they're actually doing themselves harm by over-exercising. So under-exercising, definitely a problem. Over-exercising, a problem. Remember, I started out, Dr. Silverman, by saying there's this sweet spot for just about everything. Not too little, not too much on just about everything.
You're absolutely correct. It has to be balanced.
Now, we've talked about why it's bad. Then we talked about, you know, what are some of the things internal. Now let's look at environmental factors. Air pollution definitely turns on this interleukin-6. The particle number concentration was reported to have an immediate impact on circulating IL-6 in myocardial infarction survivors. That's your heart attacks. Now, one of the interesting things in the United States, lots of fires in California, lots of fires in Colorado. And I have clients all over the country that I talk to, and those that were in those areas of the high levels of smoke found that their inflammation levels were just going through the roof. Okay, very, very sad. I've had many people that were just suffering like, I've got to leave, I've got to go somewhere, because they couldn't do that. Now, this is anecdotal, just being talked about. It appears as though the cities that had the highest air pollution were the ones that seemed to have a higher level of COVID. Now, there may have been multiple factors going in there, so we can't make that direct linear correlation, but it's an interesting thing to talk about, that that if there's a lot of particulates and a lot of air pollution, that could increase the cytokine storm. So that's why it's so important to make sure that maybe you have some air purifiers and you get some fresh air. Now, this one I have a frowny face here because there's an association between coffee consumption and the IL-6. So men who consumed greater than 200 milliliters of coffee had a 50% higher interleukin-6. Ouch. Same way with women, they had 54% higher interleukin-6. Wow. So now there's other studies that have shown that, it can be helpful to the liver. And I get asked this all the time. Is there a difference between caffeinated and decaffeinated? I've not seen any difference. If I had to speculate what it is, and purely speculation, it may be that it stimulates the adrenals to make more dopamine, but who knows? There might be anything else. And any thoughts on that, Dr. Silverman, is why you think the coffee could be doing that?
That's such an interesting concept. I'm just wondering about Italy.
Oh, that's true. Yes. Mm-hmm.
They should conduct the study, because you remember the rise in COVID cases in the summer.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and of course the areas that seemed to be hit the hardest were also areas that had a lot of air pollution.
That's it.
All right, EMF. I just recently spoke to a doctor who said he believes that we're looking at EMF today the way we did cigarettes back in the 1940s. You can actually go on YouTube and just Google cigarette commercials from the 1940s, and you'll see, I don't know if they were doctors, but maybe it was actors pretending to be doctors, but saying doctors recommend Camel cigarettes because they're soothing to the throat. And pregnant women can smoke cigarettes to deal with the stress. And we may be looking at EMF the same way. Clearly, we love our cell phones. I mean, on our cell phones, we have more access to data than the Library of Congress used to have. It's our camera, it's our calculator. We text each other, we talk to each other. We have all these apps. We love our phones, and it's actually miraculous what it does. But I think one of the things that's going to have to be studied over years is you don't feel anything when you hold your cell phone. Same when you smoke a cigarette. I mean, you could smoke a cigarette for a year and nothing would happen. But year after year, that becomes the question. And particularly, it may have more of a problem on children. So when children in their mother's wombs, the mother's carrying a cell phone, while that baby's developing, is being exposed to all that electromagnetic field. And this is an area that we are studying. And we find many, many people who are sensitive to EMF. What it does, it stimulates an enzyme called CACNA1C, drives more calcium in, and then that calcium combines with nitric oxide to make peroxynitrite, which we talked about is very inflammatory. So bottom line of this study, they looked at people who were exposed to electromagnetic fields and those who weren't. And the conclusion was long-term exposure to electromagnetic fields probably affects immune responses by stimulating the production of pro-inflammatory cytokines. And there's just a real concern, particularly young children when they're going to school and there's Wi-Fi in the ceiling, and every one of them has their iPad, and every one of them has their cell phone. Just like we may look back on, some of the things we've done. We many years ago found asbestos, and it's like, boy, this is great. Buildings don't burn down. Then, oops. Then we put lead in our gasoline because it helped the engine performance. Then, oops. Then we put lead in our paint, and then, oops. So the jury's out, not making any statements here. But I think when you see studies like this, we have to wonder what to do. Now, we're not going to get rid of our cell phones, but there are simple things you can do. Don't charge it next to your bed. Try to keep it away from you as much as possible. I'm not a big fan of Bluetooth, putting these, little transmitters into our heads. I think we're someday going to look back on that and say, what were we thinking? Putting a radio transmitter 6 inches from our brain. So there's a couple of things you can do, and there's lots of summits that are coming up to talk about how we can sensibly use our electromagnetic things. If you see in my office, I don't think you can see it, but I have a wired mouse, and my computers are wired. And I try my best to stay away from high levels of EMF. Then here we go, glyphosate. Again, talk about a huge mistake that we may look back on. For years we denied that glyphosate was a problem. This is Roundup. And here's the study. IL-6 was increased after glyphosate exposure. And I know this has been, hotly debated, and, the people who brought it, pretty much went after anybody who tried to say it was a problem. But you now see there's lawsuits for lymphomas. And I think we're just going to continue to find that the dumping of these billions of gallons of herbicides across the world may have some negative consequences. Food additives such as sodium sulfite, sodium benzoate, they increased LPS-stimulated secretion of IL-6, while curcumin decreased IL-6. And of course, we've all known for a long time that curcumin is anti-inflammatory. There might be other mechanisms, but it may be that it's the reduction of IL-6 that's the secret to curcumin being so anti-inflammatory. Mycotoxins. We just had a 3-day conference for health professionals, September 18 to 20. Hard to believe, but we spent 3 full days talking about mycotoxins. We had some of the top doctors from Australia, here in America. We looked at all of the pathways that are impacted. And here it is. The production of IL-6 increased in response to mycotoxin exposure. So I am just seeing so many individuals that their health concerns are related to living in mold. And unfortunately, some people don't want to believe it. They think, well, little mold can't hurt you, or I don't see any. But just because you don't see it, it doesn't mean it's not in the ventilating system. It's not behind some cabinets. It's not down in the basement. And I can tell you, we've seen countless people who were frantically trying to find what was wrong with them. And they weren't diagnosed with a disease. But as we did tests for mold, they had mycotoxins inside them. And those mycotoxins were stimulating an inflammatory response. So I think we have to take mycotoxins in mold very seriously. Just don't blow it off as, well, that can't hurt you. That doesn't do anything there. It is a rather serious problem. Ochratoxin, that's another mold. And a mycotoxin for mold increasingly increased IL-6 and may promote inflammation in the nasal cells. So once again, that comes often from water damage. And, if a home is 20, 30 years old, the odds that a sink overflowed, a toilet overflowed, a leak occurred somewhere is very, very high. Lipopolysaccharides stimulate the interleukin-6. So we'll talk about those a little bit more, but here it is. It induces the subsequent release of tumor necrosis factor and interleukin-6. This one, to me, was a game changer. The spirochete contains an unknown lipopolysaccharide and likely to play an important role in the problems with Lyme disease. So I think we have another slide here that shows that, this is the one. It shows that the Lyme disease spirochete contains a hitherto unknown LPS that is biologically active in vitro and in vivo, and that's what plays the important role in the seriousness of Lyme disease. To me, that was a game changer. And, we know that Lyme has been around for a long time. It's not new. But why are so many people suffering from Lyme disease? Again, we're not making any claims. It's just the interleukin-6. But if that LPS was there, and now this interleukin 6 gets stimulated and it's already high, that's a theory that I think needs to be examined. As you know, we've done 8 studies on Lyme disease, and I'm thinking that what I want to do for my 9th study is look at the genomics of those with Lyme disease and see how much predisposition they have to higher levels of interleukin 6. So the theory or hypothesis, we want to be careful we say that, the hypothesis would be that if your interleukin 6 is already high and you get Lyme disease, are you going to be one of the persons who are more impacted? Again, that's a question, not a statement, something to be researched. Of course, smoking and a history of smoking is associated with interleukin 6. So smokers had an increased formation of IL-6 compared to non-smokers. Again, the body sees that smoke as an irritant and stimulates the interleukin 6. And here's just another study that says a potential role of the IL-6 gene in the inflammatory response associated with smoking. And interestingly, in genetics that we measure in our software, they actually gave the RS number that's one of the IL-6 genes that's like a promoter or a makes the IL-6 be more active, and mutations in this gene were related to more inflammation from smoking. Now this one surprised me. Radon exposure, and again they're looking at a IL-6 promoter variant. So in my opinion, everyone should know whether they have a mutation on this RS number right here, because this will tell you whether your IL-6 is overactive. So this mutant or this mutation in this RS number was associated with more lung cancer in uranium miners and never smokers in 2 external study populations. Because we hear of people sometimes that they never smoked and yet they got lung cancer. This mutation may be a contributing factor to that. So what's the takeaway from this? I just ordered a digital radon meter that I want to use in my own home, and where I'm at in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, a very high radon area. So I want to give this to my clients. Say, hey, take this home, bring it back, see what your radon is, and do some remediation if it's a problem.
It will be very interesting to use a radon meter in the major grocery stores, considering how the fruits and vegetables are actually brought to their maturity or ripeness level, sitting in the warehouses under radon lights.
Ah, good point. Good point.
Because, why do we promote eating, for example, seasonal stuff or local stuff? Because when you get mangoes in December, they're obviously not grown up in Alberta, and they're not picked up at the level of ripeness. Otherwise, they will be delivered rotten. So they picked very green, and they're ripening up somewhere in the warehouses under radon lights and artificial, warming, whatever environment is. So it's interesting how much of the radon exposure we actually get through the fruits and veggies that we get and actually in the stores.
Interesting thought. I'll have to look into that. Now, aluminum. Induction of IL-6 by aluminum-induced oxidative stress. Now, one of the things I think we're going to be looking into someday or looking back on is why were we smearing aluminum into our armpits? I think most people know that antiperspirants have aluminum chlorohydrate. And our armpits is where a lot of our lymphatic system is. And we're smearing aluminum into our armpits to stop the perspiration. I think someday we're going to look back on that and say, what were we thinking doing this?
The interesting concept is when you go and look at the organic deodorant, I don't think you will find organic deodorant with the antiperspirant. Just exactly for that reason.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Now, what's interesting, when the interleukin 6 was upregulated by aluminum, the oxidative stress was prevented by selenium. Now, what do we know about selenium? It's the cofactor for glutathione. So if we don't have enough selenium, our glutathione's not going to do its job. So look at this study here. Short-term exposure to aluminum resulted in an increase in the IL-6. Glutathione concentrations decreased significantly upon the aluminum exposure. And then that could be prevented by giving a little bit of selenium. Now, I would imagine if we did that long enough, the selenium wouldn't be enough to do it. But I find it interesting that that shows that the aluminum depletes your glutathione, the master antioxidant. And you don't want to do anything that depletes your glutathione. So for anybody who's into, to natural health, they'll know that lead is a big problem. And again, what did we do? We put lead in our gasoline. We put lead in our paints. So if it isn't bad enough that lipopolysaccharides are a problem, what they're finding is that when there was lipopolysaccharides and lead, the problem became worse. So lipopolysaccharides stimulate interleukin 6, and then unfortunately lead enhanced it. So they're saying the heavy metal lead markedly augments the lethality of endotoxins in laboratory animals. So how many people have lead inside them simply because they live near an area where there was high lead? Every once in a while you'll see children that, ate the paint chips that had the lead in them. Or if, a farm was next to a highway, that lead can get into the to the fields. Dr. Gary Gordon, he's a big proponent of, the dangers of lead. I've heard him lecture say that they can't find animals anywhere on the planet, whether you go to the rainforest or the Arctic, that they now don't have lead in their bones. And it's just so pervasive. And now we can see that, one of the ways that lead harms us, I'm sure it's multiple, is by increasing the interleukin 6. So here's a study. The influence of occupational chronic lead exposure on the levels of selected pro-inflammatory cytokines and angiogenic factors. Chronic occupational lead exposure promotes inflammatory processes via induction of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So we really need to be careful if we live in an old home. Make sure maybe that paint is taken off carefully or covered up with something, and be very, very careful with your lead exposure. Now, what are some ways that we have some evidence-based nutrient interactions? We talked about this earlier. Curcumin will actually bring down the interleukin 6. During a meta-analysis, curcumin was found to reduce circulating IL-6 concentrations, and it wasn't dependent on dose or duration of the supplementation. Pycnogenol, that's the French maritime pine bark extract, was found to decrease C-reactive protein and the interleukin 6. Thiamine and riboflavin inhibit the production of cytokines and increase the anti-inflammatory activity of corticosteroids. So dexamethasone is a drug that's now being looked at quite a bit because it inhibits NOX2. Riboflavin and thiamine help them reduce the production of tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin 6. Now, one of the things that we've done in our software, functional genomic analysis, we have put the transporter genes for riboflavin and thiamine, just observing. Okay, that's all. And that is that when people seem to have mutations in their riboflavin and thiamine, many of these people have a lot of inflammation that very well may be going back to increased interleukin 6. So I've personally started taking riboflavin and the active form of thiamine called benfotiamine every day, just to make sure that that stays calmed down.
Dr. Miller, so for lame people, guys, riboflavin and thiamine are vitamin Bs. It's vitamin B1 and vitamin B6. So now you know the importance of your Bs.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's very important that we get those two in. Then there's something called black cumin seed oil. And I believe it's the Ayurvedics. They believe that this was one of the most powerful substances. There was an old, in the times they used to say that cures everything but death, obviously an exaggeration, but they really enjoyed the benefits of black cumin seed oil. And I find it interesting in those ancient cultures, They didn't know biochemistry. They didn't have blood work. They didn't know what interleukin-6 was. But yet they somehow knew that this black cumin seed oil had a lot of healing powers. And we've thrown some of that information out. But now through biochemistry, we're able to see that, some of these things that, were used historically are quite beneficial. Apigenin. Now, this one blows me away. Found in parsley, lowly parsley and chamomile. Enhances the expression of GSH synthase. That's glutathione. Catalase and SOD. These are your three major antioxidants. There's an enzyme called NOx, NADPH oxidase, that causes inflammation. It inhibits this. There's another process called NRF2, nuclear transaction factor, that stimulates the production of, the utilization of, and the recycling of your antioxidants. It increases that, and it strongly decreases interleukin-6. Parsley, who'd have thunk, and chamomile do all of that. What a miracle we have in these plants. And the active ingredient is called apigenin. Now, oxytocin, that's the love hormone. That's what goes up when we hug someone, when we kiss someone, when we cuddle a child, even hold our dog. Interestingly, oxytocin attenuates the NADPH-dependent superoxide. That's a nasty free radical, okay, and IL-6 secretion in macrophages and vascular walls. So I found it interesting during all these lockdowns that people started going to the places where they could get pets, and the adoption of pets went absolutely through the roof. And I think there we go. Yes. Who do we have here, Dr. Silverman?
This is Yentl. So this is the hugging cat. So this is my oxytocin.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I've heard it said that a 20-second hug, thymus to thymus, is enough to increase your oxytocin. Now, what are we doing during the lockdown? Don't get any closer than 6 feet to anybody. Don't even shake hands with anybody. And potentially that could be having an impact on us, that our oxytocin is going down. I really don't know if they're effective, but there are some nasal sprays that supposedly provide oxytocin. I really don't know if they're effective. But one of the things we want to look at the Research Institute is, are there ways, pathways? I mean, I really don't know what is the precursor. I don't know what are the, the cofactors for oxytocin. But if there'd be some way of supporting that, that'd be very healthy. And again, possibly why, we're seeing such an increase in illness because, and I don't disagree with the need for staying away, but there may be unintended consequence that as we lock ourselves up and we don't touch each other, that there's the potential that oxytocin is going down, contributing to an increase in the inflammation. So here's the study that's showing that the effect of IL-6 on lipopolysaccharides. And as you can see that as you put more oxytocin in, the interleukin-6 levels went down. So absolutely fascinating. So hug your cat, hug your husband, wife, your child, your significant other, and increase your oxytocin levels.
Even go outside and hug the trees.
Well, there you go. There you go. Hydrogen water. Now, I have been a huge fan of hydrogen water for a long time. In case anybody doesn't understand, water is just simply H2O. There are tablets that you can get that you just drop them in a glass of water and they fizz. And when they're fizzing, what they're doing is they're knocking the hydrogen loose. And then you drink it very quickly. And that hydrogen not only boosts some of your antioxidants, but it reduces interleukin-6. I was very surprised by that. So hydrogen water lowers serum IL-6 tumor necrosis factors, thereby exerting a protective effect. So just about every day, I don't forget many days, I drop one of those pills in. As soon as it's done fizzing, I chug it down very quickly. And all it's doing is knocking hydrogen loose. The only way that can be contraindicated is someone has quite severe SIBO, small intestine bacterial overgrowth. The hydrogen combines with that, and you'll feel bloated and gassy and miserable. It passes, didn't do any harm, but that just tells you that you need to get that SIBO straightened out before you try the hydrogen water. Somebody said to me, Bob, you can do one thing a day, one nutrient a day, and this really isn't a nutrient. I think I'd personally pick hydrogen water. That'd be my top pick. If I was limited to one thing, that'd probably be my top pick. Some pulsed electromagnetic field suppresses IL-6 transcription. Now that's available in some holistic offices, or I believe there's some devices you can even now purchase that are pulsed electromagnetic fields. And of course, vitamin D. Vitamin D administration can significantly reduce the IL-6 in people that are on ventilator-associated pneumonia. So clearly there's a relationship to our vitamin D levels. And what do you have there? Oh, you got your PEMF. All right. Tell you what, let me just stop the share so you can show that. Go right ahead. Tell us what it is. Oh, your microphone's off. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm lucky. I've got the pulse electromagnetic field machine.
Yes,
so
nice.
I buzz practically every day.
Yes. Okay. And I want to just explain those. You have like those little loops that go around like a joint or something. And yeah. Yeah, I know Dr. Gordon is a big fan of the pulsed electromagnetic fields. And of course, you know, your vitamin D significantly reduces the interleukin-6. It seems to have a negative effect directly on IL-6. And so it's really important right now to keep your vitamin D levels at adequate levels. So work with your doctor to get your vitamin D measured and make sure it's at the right level. I personally like liquid vitamin Ds that have the, they're with the fats, because that seems to make it more bioavailable. And I also recommend that you take your vitamin D with K2 because the vitamin D could cause you to increase too much calcium. And ironically, that calcium, if you have the EMF problem, could actually become inflammatory. You know what? I think I stopped sharing the screen. Let me go back to that. When we showed your kitty cat there, I forgot. So study of vitamin D administration on interleukin-6, and it helps with ventilator-associated pneumonia. And I think, oops, where are I at here? All right, now we're going to talk about the good fats and the bad fats. Your omega-6s, your arachidonic acids, stimulate the IL-6 release. So that's like the fats that you might get from some of the junk food that we might eat. On the other hand, the EPA and DHA, that's like the omega-3s. The omega-3s consist of the EPA and DHA, had a significantly lowering effect on levels of interleukin-6. So I didn't put the slide in here, but there are studies that show that some of the Japanese, live very healthy to an old age. Multiple factors, but their high fish intake may be a part of that they're getting more of the EPAs and DHAs and less of the processed foods. That's why sometimes many people say when you go to the grocery store, walk around the edges and forget the things in the middle, all those processed foods. Any thoughts you have on the omega-6s and omega-3s, Dr. Silverman?
Absolutely, and the interesting thing is I kind of have my point of view. I'm a vegan. However, I absolutely supplement with a fish-based omega-3s and omega-6s, aka fish oil, DHA, and EPA. I think it's incredibly important from every perspective, whether it's a cellular membranes, whether it's support of the microgut, whether it's an IL-6, it's incredibly important. The ratio is important. And when you were mentioning pro-inflammatory, the abundance of IL-6. So guys, please, garbage your canola oil.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, it's bad stuff. Hyperbaric oxygen. Over a long time, it's supposed to like a long treatment, but IL-6 can be declined by use of hyperbaric oxygen. And then we talked about selenium. We talked about how that's inversely associated with interleukin-6. Now, which brings me to what I'd like to talk about is what I call the Holmes hypothesis. This is a name of a relative. So what we're saying is that, and again, hypothesis, keyword, environmental factors that we were not exposed to historically with their negative effects amplified in those with genetic predisposition causes overstimulation of the NOx NADPH oxidase enzyme. I'm going to pull a chart in a minute. This results in overproduction of superoxide, peroxynitrite, mast cells, histamine, and glutamate. And again, I'm going to pull a chart in to make it make sense for you. This enzyme uses NADPH to produce the free radicals, resulting in what I've called the NADPH steal, resulting in less ability to have sufficient NADPH to support your detox, nitric oxide, and recycle your antioxidants. So then these free radicals produced stimulate renin, angiotensin 1 and 2, aldosterone, IL-6, and NOx, thus resulting in a positive feedback loop that creates a self-perpetuating vicious cycle of inflammation that we've named the Holmes cycle. So let me pull in a map of this. And 1 second to pull this map over.
Let's put on your glasses.
Yes, there we
Here
go.
it comes. Put
Here
on
it
your
comes.
magnifying glass.
So, all right, that isn't what I want. Well, I can use this one. Okay. But let me see if I can pull this map over. Just having a little trouble with my mouse here. My mouse is a little too tricky. Here it comes. Come on, you can come over. There we go. So this is a little easier to see. So this is the NOx enzyme. And what I'll do is I'll just blow this up just a little bit. There we go. So here's the NOx enzyme. And you can see here in the middle that it takes oxygen from iron, a molecule or an electron from NADPH to create these inflammatory agents called superoxide and hydrogen peroxide. That will stimulate something called peroxynitrite, mast cells, and histamine. By the way, all this stuff over here is genetic mutations that could increase the potential for that. But here's the real kicker. The histamine, mast cells, superoxide, dopamine, high blood sugar stimulate this enzyme to make more angiotensin 1 and 2, more aldosterone, more interleukin 6. And interestingly, there's an enzyme called ACE2 that takes these inflammatory markers, turns them into anti-inflammatory. Probably most of you heard COVID comes in using ACE2, weakening it. And then if you have high glutamate, that suppresses ACE2 as well. So this is what I believe happens to many people. They get exposed to mycotoxins, EMF, Lyme disease, allergens. This thing starts and just spins in a cycle and just keeps going and going and going. Now, if I'm able to pull it over, what I'd like to do is pull over a map of just the interleukin 6. There it is. Okay. So we just made this map. And what this shows here is those things we talked about, the histamine, the superoxide, the mast cells, stimulating this process to stimulate the IL-6. That stimulates the NOx enzyme, the mast cells, and the histamine. And then look what happens. The histamine comes back and stimulates it again, making more superoxide, more peroxynitrite, more damage to your cells. So what we did over here is we listed mold and mycotoxins, Lyme, lipopolysaccharides, EMF, radon, air pollution, smoking, sodium sulfate, excess coffee, the heavy metals, glyphosate, the bad fats, anything that stimulates mTOR. That's environmental. Then internally, high histamine, dopamine, angiotensin 2, NADPH oxidase, bradykinin that we'll talk about in a moment, obesity, hyperglycemia, high homocysteine, oxalates, C. diff that increases the dopamine, estriol, hydrogen peroxide, overexercise, virus, and anxiety. Now, I just want to briefly talk about bradykinin. This is also produced under some conditions, and it also stimulates IL-6. And again, we need the ACE enzyme and ACE2 that can be inhibited by COVID. There's research out there showing that the cytokine storm is related to high levels of bradykinin as well. So what do we do? Again, potential, not making any claims, but there's studies out there that hydrogen water, thiamine and riboflavin, black cumin seed oil, apigenin, pine bark, oxytocin, PEMF, vitamin D, the good fats, possibly hyperbaric oxygen, selenium, keep that blood sugar healthy, keep that weight healthy, and moderate exercise, not over-exercise. So I believe on this chart, you see one of the keys. One of the first slides we showed was healthy aging. How do we age healthy? Let's put aside, preventing disease, just how do we stay healthy? How do we stay vibrant? Many pieces to that. But clearly, I believe that that likely this will be a contributing factor if you try to reduce some of these things, try to do some of these things. And then here's where the genetics comes into play. If you've got genes here that make this overactive, if you don't have enough superoxide dismutase, if you don't clear the histamine, then you're those canary in the mines that have the problem. So what do we do? Here's the interventions. Make sure you're in a mold-free environment. And don't assume just because you don't see it that you don't have it. Okay. If mold is suspected, consider mold remediation. Work with a health professional to check mycotoxin levels and detox. Consider functional genomics to identify the potential weakness in the pathways. Consider air purifiers, particularly if there's air pollution. These are the genes that are related to high glutamate. And if an issue, you may want to limit your glutamine supplementation. I love the herbs hinokial, magnesium threonate. Check your glyphosate. Take steps to reduce exposure. Check your house for radon. If you've got some gut issues, consider testing for C. diff and appropriate treatment. If there's sensitivities to sulfites, wine, sulfur foods, check your sulfation genomics such as SUOX. Sometimes a simple thing like molybdenum will support that SUOX enzyme. Sulfites stimulate interleukin 6. Sulfation clears dopamine that, if not cleared, will stimulate IL-6. If you think you've got a high oxalate issue, consider the testing and then compensate by lowering those a little bit. If sensitive to histamine foods, consider dietary changes in nutrients to reduce histamine. These are the gene names that, if there's mutations in them, can either slow the clearing or increase the production of histamine. Check for heavy metals and take appropriate steps to detox. Check the CAC-NA1C genes for appropriate or potential EMF sensitivity. Consider caution with EMF exposure. Consider measuring dopamine, particularly if you get upset quickly. Check your DBH and COMT genes. Measure your homocysteine. We talked about that earlier. Mutations in these genes can cause problems with methylation. Healthy weight, normal blood sugar. Get those good fats in. Avoid some of those bad fats. Exercise, but don't over-exercise. Stop smoking. Check your glutathione and SOD genes for proper function and compensate if needed. If you really want to be aggressive, check the renin, ACE2, IL-6, and HMOX genes that have the potential to allow this on its own to be running a little more hot. Now, if someone's a health professional, we had an excellent conference back in September where the whole topic was mycotoxins. And just contact us if you'd like access to the recordings of this. And then finally, if you're a health professional, we do offer, the online education, software, saliva test, and our own line of functional genomic nutrition. This is health professionals only. So if you're a doctor or a chiropractor or a nutritionist or a naturopath, and you're interested in learning this work, we're going to give you the contact information right here. We have an online certification course. And if anyone wants to contact our office for health coaching, tolhealth.com, 717-733-2003. If you're a health professional, this is the software that you can use. You can do a free trial. And Yvonne Lucchese is the executive director. So if you're a health professional and you think it's interesting to look at the genome and try to use that as a tool to help you decide how to support function, go right ahead. If someone wants to do a health coaching with us, there's our contact information. So that, I believe, is the end of the talk. Yes, it is. So let me find out to stop the sharing. And if anyone has any questions, we can do that. Or Dr. Silverman, any questions you have or thoughts before we wrap it up here?
Well, first of all, incredible gratitude. And one question was, is biased the same as pure estrogen? It's kind of beyond my scope.
I don't know the answer to that. Do you?
I don't. It's beyond my scope. I need to look at this. And I don't think it is because estrogen is not an estrogen. Estrogen is a combination of basically three major estrogens as estron, estradiol, and estriol. So I need to look at what's biased, whether it is a combination of some of the estrogens and progesterone. I simply don't know.
I don't know either. Yeah, it's out of my scope of practice.
It's out of my scope, sorry.
Yes. So someone said, this is amazing information. Wow, that was from Janet. And
I agree. It's absolutely incredible information. But actually, you summarize such a complex thing into very simple ways of how to take charge of it. It's actually very simple. It's the way we live our lives and make changes.
Yes, that's all there is to it. So, as I said, I was a little stunned that how the things we've taught for years of healthy things to do impact this interleukin-6. But the good news is when you look at your genomics, say, for example, if you have trouble transporting thiamine, a little more B1 thiamine might be in order. If you've got upregulation of the interleukin-6, maybe you need to be extra careful. Maybe you need to do a black cumin seed oil, some other things. Take more steps, know what your risks are. Check your vitamin D.
And the thing is, guys, honestly, I love, and I'm learning more and more as to test, assess, address, don't guess. And to me, as a pathologist, I think the genetic and epigenetic profile is so important. I've done my genetic profiling with through Yvonne. I couldn't read it, so now I have to go back and reread it because it's awesome. It's so awesome to know. It's not about your genes, but it's about those which we call epigenetics. That's what you can tweak. And that's what you can tweak with absolutely simple ways of life. And tweaking this epigenetic malformations or some, hiccups, that is going to affect the genes. And then the lifestyle changes. Anybody can take care of glyphosate at home. There's so like everybody can eat Brazil nuts. That's your selenium. There's so many ways that we can, epigenin, so parsley. Well, there was parsley in my dinner today. So this kind of things, there are so many simple ways that we can do. I'm definitely going to go for hydrogen water. Absolutely no. In fact, I think we did it in the Soviet Union. I just didn't know that we did it because we dropped something in the water and started fizzing.
I'm sure that's what you're doing, yes.
So there are so many ways. So Dr. Miller, you are, other than you're a genius, your kindness, the kindness of your heart, to give up your time and do it, to educate so many people, because this is a butterfly effect. We had, over 20 people on the Zoom and they're going to be talking. So, then now we're talking hundreds and then we're talking thousands, and that's the way we are.
Absolutely. Well, it's just my honor to be able to do this, to be of help to others. Our whole mission is to be of contribution to humanity. That's
you're incredible. You are absolutely. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Well, this was a lot of fun, and let's do this again sometime on another subject.